on Donald Trump's final full day as president, the Senate's holding confirmation hearings for 5 of President-elect Joe Biden's cabinet nominees as Biden prepares for his inauguration Wednesday, along with Kamala Harris. Biden has already outlined a day-one agenda of executive actions to address the raging coronavirus pandemic and roll back key parts of Trump's agenda. On Wednesday, he says he'll repeal Trump's travel ban for citizens of majority Muslim countries, move to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, and issue a mask mandate on federal property. Biden also plans to unveil a sweeping immigration bill to offer an 8-year path to citizenship for an estimated 11 million people living in the U.S. without legal status. Meanwhile, Trump plans to leave Washington, D.C. Wednesday morning and continues to make false claims of election fraud after Congress impeached him last week for a second time after the failed insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. Among those with an agenda for incoming President Biden are members of the Squad, and in a minute we'll be joined by Congressmember Rashida Tlaib of Michigan. This is Congressmember Tlaib speaking during the House impeachment proceedings last Wednesday.
Those who incited an attack on the People's House do not get to talk about healing and unity. They have torn this country apart. They have stoked the fire and then handed the gasoline to Donald Trump. Dr. King once said, "True peace is not merely the absence of tension. It is in the presence of justice." Today, we must embody those words. And we must understand that peace must be centered in truth and action. We cannot sit, Madam Chair, sit idly by after a violent attempted coup and allow lies and hate to continue.
So that was Wednesday. On Monday, Congressmember Pramila Jayapal, chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, tweeted, "The Senate reconvenes tomorrow. They should immediately convict Donald Trump and hold him fully accountable for inciting a deadly attack on our country." Well, for more, we're joined by Congressmember Rashida Tlaib. It's great to have you back on Democracy Now! If you can start off by talking about what is about to happen tomorrow. It's not only the inauguration. We'd like you to talk about this unprecedented crackdown in your adopted city right now, the capital of the United States, but also this slew of first-day executive orders. It looks like the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, the largest caucus in Congress, has certainly held sway on a number of these issues.
Yeah, I think many of us are obviously concerned, but it's just a continuation of this administration. I mean, the Trump administration hasn't fully been transparent, nor have they had moral values. I don't care if it's around pardons, death penalty. There's just been a wave of increased, I think, hate and this violent agenda by this current administration. So I'm not surprised, as all of us were celebrating the legacy of Dr. King, that he was yet still signing a number of executive orders. And then also continuing with appointments and other kinds of measures that are pretty unprecedented. So I think it's really important, Amy, to understand just how dangerous this man is, even after he leaves office. He has spewed out this agenda that I don't think is going to go anywhere. I think he's going to continue to lead this type of what people call an insurrection. I call it violent attacks on our country. And so I think it's really important that we as a country realize accountability is extremely important here, from those in Congress that have enabled him, from those that continue to support him, that they all need to be held equally accountable, as well as Donald Trump. I hope that there's an awakening in the Senate. But I've been waiting for that awakening to happen for quite a while, for Leader McConnell and many others to finally say enough is enough and impeach and convict the forever impeached twice President Donald Trump. What he did was pretty unprecedented. And Amy, I have to be honest, if it was somebody that looked like me, if it was President Barack Obama, there would be no question that he would be held accountable, he would be convicted. He'd be removed from office. He would never, ever be able to run again. he wouldn't ever be able to get public benefits. He has truly sent us to a dangerous path that I don't think is going to go away very easily, even after he leaves office.
Congressmember, could you talk a little bit about your own experience during that insurrection? There was, according to the staff in Representative Ayanna Presley's office, panic buttons had been ripped out. What have you heard about that? And tell us what you yourself experienced that day.
Yeah, that day I was not on campus, even though I was scheduled to speak on the floor because Michigan was one of the states that was going to be objected by the Republicans, the Electoral College. So I was planning on speaking for over close to 5 minutes on the House floor. But fortunately, by fate, I was not on campus, nor was I near the attacks. I started beginning to hear about them, checking in with many of my Michigan delegation members who were on the floor. I didn't experience similar trauma. I think many of my colleagues did. But it sure angered me to see the place that I work, that I fight for my district every single day, under attack, and so easily done. I kept seeing videos after videos of these folks carrying Confederate flags, chanting Nancy, Nancy, trying to find her, to kidnap members of the United States Congress, calling us the traitors when they're the ones attacking our democracy. And so it definitely, I think, for my team and I, who this past week did a session around just self-care and trauma and understanding that, the place that we work and that we go and advocate and fight for our people, was literally surrounded by gun-carrying, violent folks who had every intention of hurting members of Congress or anyone that wanted to hold Trump accountable. I think it's important for listeners to please take a moment and know it's hard, but I did. I listened to the speech that this forever impeached, lawless, corrupted president gave to the crowd before they headed towards the Capitol. It was very clear what his orders were, and they followed them very clearly. And yet again, many of my colleagues continue to enable him and continue to support what happened. I'm against violence, they say. And then they continue to say, that's not what they were here to support, when it is very clear from intelligence they had every intention of kidnapping. They left human feces all throughout the hallway, carried Confederate flags, chanted and looked for Speaker Pelosi while one of my colleagues live tweeted the whereabouts of the speaker. This was, could have been so much worse than what we saw. I mean, just the image of the noose erected outside of the Capitol in hopes that they were going to be able to lynch the Vice President of the United States for, following our democracy, following what the will of the people were, which was to make sure that Joe Biden was the next president of the United States. But this is so deep and so painful.
I wanted to ask you about some of the initiatives of President-elect Biden, both some of the executive orders, a reversal of the ban on travel from Muslim-majority countries, and also the XL pipeline, and also the indication that he's apparently going to try to move quickly on immigration reform, something that has stymied Congress now for more than 16 years. I mean, 14, 15 years, since 2006. There have been attempts to try to get immigration reform through Congress. Did you get a sense that this will change in this session of the new Congress?
I mean, I think, for myself and many of my sisters in service and others, we are asking for a sense of urgency and moving forward and trying to address these broken systems that have left so many of our families in a lot of pain, many of which are oppressive policies, hate and discriminative policies that have torn our families apart, left them in some ways, their children and others, again, with trauma that's going to who knows how long it's going to take to even address that. It's going to be generations of our families that have been impacted by this hate agenda that continues to spew in these broken systems that honestly should have been addressed years ago. So yes, for my immigrant neighbors in the 13th Congressional District, what I hear from them is this is great. They want the details, and they want to make sure that someone like them, who have been here for years, have been part of our community for decades, raising their children here with mine, that they are going to have a pathway to citizenship that's not going to take another decade or take these kinds of leaps of bureaucracy that really will delay, again, for them to be able to move on with their life and not live in fear.
I wanted to ask you, Congressmember Rashida Tlaib, about the experience of your colleagues who were there. Is it right you were vaccinated right around that time?
I had the second vaccination, and I never get sick. And I got all the side effects. Literally woke up with fever, thought it was COVID, got the test done. And all of this, me trying to make sure that I was going to be able to get to the floor to speak on behalf of my state. But that's when the lockdown happened, and I kept hearing reports and checking in again with colleagues.
So you had Ayanna Pressley, the first African-American congresswoman elected from Massachusetts, her staff realizing when they were locked in the office that somehow the panic buttons, is this true that you all have in your offices, were ripped out, something they had never seen before? You had Pramila Jayapal and Congressmember Coleman from New Jersey, both testing positive for COVID as they were forced to be in a secure location very closely with Republican colleagues who refused to wear masks. Now, both of their husbands are also have tested positive for COVID-19.
Yeah, so, I think Representative Pressley, staff folks did make public that the panic button wasn't there. It did make many of us, including myself and others, to make sure ours was intact. Mine was. And again, I don't know how much we can share of the whereabouts of these buttons, but I know it's part of, I think before we even got there, part of a process or a protocol for members of the United States Congress. I think for many of my colleagues, including Representative Pressley and Pramila Jayapal, Representative Bonnie Watson-Coleman, many of my colleagues that were in that room, undisclosed room, we all, I think, watched as some of the newer members, the ones that have continued to enable this president and the violence on our democracy and on our people, they mocked one of my colleagues who gently and very gracefully asked for them to wear masks. This, on top of, again, this attack, many of which heard the shooting outside of the House chambers. Some of my colleagues were telling me the next day, one of them, who's been there longer than I have, said he's experiencing post-traumatic stress the next day, just realizing his whole body was kind of in shock. And again, a continuation of hearing stories from many of my colleagues about just how unprepared and just the kind of shock that they all went through, and experiencing that and hearing not only the shooting, but also the chants and just kind of the loud crowd screaming outside of the House chambers.
And your colleague Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying she feared Republican lawmakers would lead rioters to her if she joined them in a secure room. She said, "I thought I was going to die," which leads us to, one, the demand for an investigation. People like Mikey Sherrill, the Congresswoman from New Jersey, saying she saw these tours the day before of what turned out to be the rioters, the domestic terrorists, the next day. Could only be invited in by Congress members or their staff. And what the impeachment trial would look like, why there's a demand to do it while McConnell is still in charge when the Democrats are going to be taking over in just a matter of days. Is that right, the Senate?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that there is a tremendous breakdown of trust among many of us with some of our colleagues. Again, some of which were live tweeting, continued to even tweet and speak on the floor during the impeachment, the second impeachment. They're kind of almost, enabling speeches about what happened and how this, spewing into the conspiracy theories that this was a stolen election, continuation of them, pushing back against this rhetoric that is real, coming from this white supremacist in chief, President Trump. And it was just, you can see that as we sat there in shock after everything we've all gone through together, including themselves, I watched, again, one by one, continue to support what happened. They claim they're not against violence, but they're supporting a violent president. They're supporting someone that just gave that speech to the crowd that really gave them the green light of going ahead and again, doing what they did on January 6th. I think with impeachment, people want to move quickly. This is, I think we wanted 8 days ago for the Senate to convene and to stop, because what you see now, not only with executive orders, who knows what he's going to do with pardons, he's appointing people. Understand, this is a very dangerous president. This is a person that is a threat to our country and our nation. And we want, again, a sense of urgency and have those that enabled him, including Mitch McConnell, to finally wake up and hold him accountable. It is important, again, for the future of our nation, but also to send a strong message that it's over, enough with the conspiracy theories that have led to, this kind of hate agenda, but also underlining racism when they target communities like Detroit and communities that I represent. And so I think it's important to understand, for all of us, we wanted them to move quickly because we're seeing what we're seeing in the last few days. Who knows what he's going to be able to do? Again, he is the most not powerful person only in the country, but the world. And I think, again, he's a very imminent danger to our world, to our country.
Congressmember, I wanted to ask you about a big story closer to home in Michigan. The former Governor Rick Snyder on Thursday pled not guilty to 2 counts of willful neglect of duty in relationship to the 2014 Flint water scandal. Your reaction to, one, his indictment, and 2, the significance of indicting a former governor?
Yeah, I think it's really important that many of those elected, including the governor, is held to a higher standard. The public welfare, people's health were in his hands. They hid for months, even a year, I believe, from the Flint community and kept saying that the water was safe. I want people to understand this is not only just about getting clean drinking water. It's the fact that many died because of the poisoning. Many of our children in Flint are now having side effects and will forever be to have lead in their DNA that can later be passed down to their children. And so for many of the Flint families, they're already sick and they wanted to see justice. They wanted, no matter who he is or she is, whoever was involved that hid the fact that they were drinking poisoned water, be held accountable. And that includes the governor, includes jail time, includes that kind of justice that I think many of folks want to see. But they also have testified in a House Oversight Committee that we had a hearing in my district, that they also want to see medical coverage. They want to see, on top of course, holding him accountable, but coverage for them to be able to take care of themselves now that they are sick, that they have children that need extra care, many of which are struggling to learn in school. So there has to be a combination, of course, justice in that sense of holding the governor accountable for what he did knowingly and intentionally. It's criminal negligence, but also to make sure that we're taking care of the people that we, the government, that Governor Snyder and others allowed to get sick. The horror stories I'm hearing currently still is so many, again, are suffering from the aftermath with illnesses and with other side effects of again, poisoning their bodies with lead.
Congressmember Tlaib, you're a Palestinian American, and you've made history as one of two of the first Muslim American women in Congress, along with Ilhan Omar. I wanted to get your reaction to, well, Israel has vaccinated more of its population, something like 20% of its citizens, including Jewish settlers on the West Bank. And it's been hailed around the world the most vaccinated population. And yet Palestinians have not been vaccinated. You have family in the West Bank. Human Rights Watch, among many others, including so many Palestinians, have demanded that COVID-19 vaccines be provided to the more than 4.5 million Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza. Can you discuss this?
I mean, I think it's really important to understand Israel as a racist state, and that they would deny Palestinians like my grandmother access to a vaccine, that they don't believe that she's an equal human being that deserves to live, deserves to be able to be protected by this global pandemic. And it's really hard to watch as this apartheid state continues to deny their own neighbors, the people that breathe the same air they breathe, that live in the same communities. You could put a settlement wherever you want, but on the other side of that wall is a farm community, a village where my grandmother lives. And many of our, various family members and others that I know are trying to, again, to live a good life, to a free life, free from this oppressive policies, these racist policies that deny them access to public health, deny them access to freedom of travel, deny them access to economic opportunities. It is so critically important that we call it out. Our country continues to enable that country and enable Netanyahu, who continues to spew anti-Arab rhetoric that allows violence towards Palestinians to continue in a way that is so inhumane and doesn't follow international human rights. And so I think it's very important, if anything, I hope my colleagues, I hope our country sees what the Palestinians have been trying to tell us for a very long time, that Israel has no intention of ever being caring or allow equality or freedom for them as their neighbors. And you can see it with the distribution of the vaccine. You also saw it with the testing and tracing. My family told me they didn't have access to testing. They would get some side effects, and they would use the small little house that they had and quarantine the family member. They had no access at all for any preventive measures, any medication. And again, that continues on. And we allow, again, enabling Israel to continue to do that. They have the power to distribute that vaccine to the Palestinian people, their own neighbors, again, from feet away from where they live, many of which, again, could expose them and their family. And it doesn't, if anything, it just reiterates what the Palestinian people and even human rights groups have been telling us, is that this is an apartheid state.
Rashida Tlaib, I want to thank you so much for being with us, Democratic Congressmember to Michigan's 13th Congressional District. Oh, and there's not a lot to talk about of joy during these pandemic and insurrection times, but congratulations on your new little puppy, Tata. Maybe one day my new little puppy, Zazu, will get to meet yours.
She truly is a blessing.